Hi, Taylor. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm really excited to dive in.
I know I'm so pumped to have this conversation. I think that it's definitely something that's becoming more mainstream, but I don't think that there's enough information or people talking about it yet. So I'm really excited. You're clearly an innovator, which is incredible. And I would love to just start with you sharing a little bit about you and what you do and how you got to this place where you're educating women about getting off birth control and what birth control is really doing to our bodies and our minds and all of that.
So, I'm a registered dietitian at heart. That's my professional title. But personally, I was brought into, this side of my career. I almost call it like my second act because I was an eating disorder dietitian for many, many years. And I thought that's where I was going to stay. And both of those roles were, built by my own personal experience. So going back many years ago at 18 years old, I was put on birth control for a missing period. And, I was like your very typical, very healthy, like very clean eating, exercising, was doing all the things right. And no one really questioned anything about it. They were like, my doctor was just like, well, go on birth control and stay on it till you want to get off and become pregnant. So there's a lot wrong with that now. But at the time, my mom and I were like, great, like, listen to your doctor. Like, we didn't think anything of it. What was actually happening was I was actually struggling with an undiagnosed eating disorder. So that's why I had a missing period. So those healthy habits, air quotes, were actually messing with my hormones. I was thinking about food 24/7. I was, really strict with exercising. I was not healthy, but to the outside world and to doctors because they didn't ask those deeper underlying questions of, well, why is her period missing? It was just assumed like, okay, we'll just take birth control, problem solved. So fast forward 10 years, that's my own experience with disordered eating. I was never formally diagnosed, but I probably could have been. That would have helped my recovery speed along a lot quicker, but I was able to recover on my own. And that's what really spurred my passion for working in eating disorders. So that's where
Mhm.
I began my career as a dietitian. I thought I was going to stay there my entire life, absolutely loved it until I was 27. So about 9 years later, I was listening to a random podcast by Alyssa Biddy, who she's a women's health expert, has written tons of really great books, including In the Flow, Woman Code. She was on this random podcast I was listening to. And it was
Mhm.
one of those things where it was like just meant to be. I had never listened to this podcast in my life. I was literally driving to get takeout food from a town away. And she was talking about all the negative side effects of birth control and
Mhm.
how you're not actually having a period on birth control. And here I am at 27 years old. I have a master's degree in nutrition, very health aware, and I had no clue what was happening in my own body. And my mind was blown. And so I went down this rabbit hole of learning all about birth control, learning all about the side effects it has that I was never taught, never knew about. And this was like mentally connecting these dots of like, oh, like maybe that's why I've always been bloated. Maybe that's why I struggle with really bad anxiety and it's gotten worse over the past couple of years. And I made the decision to quit birth control cold turkey. And for the next 4 years, I struggled with really horrible post birth control syndrome. So, really bad acne, terrible anxiety, like really intrusive thoughts that I couldn't control, even on anxiety medication, doing therapy, irregular periods because birth control didn't fix the periods like my doctor told me. It just masked the deeper root issue. And I tried so much to basically heal myself. And whenever I went to my doctor or my dermatologist, their only solution really was just go back on birth control. And I felt so frustrated and so lost because I knew something was wrong in my body, but no one was telling me what to do to fix it. And so
Yeah.
I felt really betrayed too. And like I didn't have that informed consent of knowing that these things, part of the things I was struggling with were most likely from birth control and being on it for over 10 years. So that's what really pushed me to learn more about functional nutrition. I was conventionally trained as a dietitian, so very like black or white, very surface level, reactive versus proactive nutrition. And I dug deeper and was able to learn about functional lab testing and use a root cause approach to heal my own skin, heal my own hormones. And I was still in my job. I was a manager at the time.
Mhm.
And I just was noticing so many other women were struggling with the exact same things, both personally and professionally. And it wasn't my role to fix them in that way, but I knew I just had this like deeper drive to do something different. So I was doing meaningful work in the eating disorder space, but it just wasn't the same. I saw that there was clearly a gap in women's health of like all of this could be avoided if women had the right information, had the right support, had the right plan that was tailored to them.
Mm.
And so that's what led me to opening my business, Nourished by Taylor. And I've been doing that. I'm about a year and a half old. So still a semi baby business, but that's exactly what I do now because of my own horrible experience coming off birth control and wanting to help other women avoid the same thing.
That is a really powerful story and testimony. And I'm curious about like the digging and the research and the findings that you came across in your journey of figuring this out, and what kind of information and research is out there about this, because I was put on birth control when I was 14, and I was on it until I got off to have my daughter at I got off at maybe age 28, maybe 29, I think 28. I mean, I was on birth control a long time, and then after that, I didn't go back on the pill. I did, like, IUDs, but which is still birth control. I mean, some of the stuff you're saying, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, so much of my life makes sense." Like, my
Yeah,
mental
connecting the
health
dots.
and potential physical health challenges that I'm still working through. Probably part of that is what birth control did to my body over
Yeah.
those times, especially as I was developing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in summary, like birth control, it's just like with any medication, like you watch the medication commercials and, like half the commercial is like, it has this side effect, like this could happen, this could happen. And so, no one really talks about those things, but I think that's something, and I want to make it clear, like I'm not against birth control. I'm just against non-informed consent. And
Oh,
that's where I think we are being failed as women by medical professionals is like, we'll just take this pill or, do this
mhm.
medication and it will solve all the problems. We have to be asking the deeper question of why. So, first and foremost, if someone was put on birth control for a reason other than pregnancy prevention, like a lot of women are, it's the most prescribed medication for women. It's kind of like a cookie cutter. Well, we don't really know, like your hormones are imbalanced, like take birth control. So if you, let's say, were put on it for acne or for painful periods or a missing period, that already is telling us that something deeper is going on, whether it's inflammation, under eating like me, stress, some sort of thing that's happening. But birth control itself, it has lots of side effects. For example, it depletes key vitamins and minerals. So vitamins A, C, and E, which are antioxidants. So for example, women who are put on birth control to help with their acne, it might help a little bit, but it's actually depleting those minerals that women need more of to help their acne. Like women who are acne prone, they need more vitamins A, C, and E. They're antioxidants. It
Mm.
also depletes magnesium, zinc, selenium. Those are minerals that are so, so important for mood, your mental health, energy. So we also,
Thyroid.
yes, your thyroid, which is
Yeah.
essentially your metabolism. And so, that's one piece of it. It also messes with your gut. So, birth control encourages the growth of bad bacteria and it discourages the growth of good bacteria, which
Mm.
leads to the state of dysbiosis in your body. And that can lead to, not absorbing the nutrition from the food you're getting. It can lead to protein malabsorption from, low stomach acid or things like that. Bloating, there's a huge connection between mental health and your gut as well. So, mood symptoms and then detoxification, right? Like it puts a ton of stress on your liver, and both your liver and your gut and your skin are detox organs. But we think a lot about the liver with that. And again, just like with any medication, puts lots of stress on that, which can lead to poor estrogen detox or other hormone detox, difficulty with skin issues, or, I always come back to the mood because that's a lot of
Mm.
what this podcast is about. But just so many of those things that it really affects the entire body. There is no organ that goes untouched with birth control. And the longer you use it, the more those things compound.
Interesting. So, so when you talk about getting off of it and the syndrome, is that what you called it?
Post birth control syndrome.
Post birth control syndrome. Okay.
Yep.
Can we talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So post birth control syndrome, it's not like it is a term, but it's not a term you're going to hear from your doctor, most likely. And it's a combination of a bunch of different symptoms. And typically it happens about 3 to 6 months after stopping birth control cold turkey. If you don't do the prep work, which I'm sure we'll talk about, that's what I help my women do is like proactively stop by prepping their body and healing those imbalances beforehand. But if someone quits cold turkey like I did, they didn't know because that's what doctors pretty much tell us. They're like, well, just like stop when you're ready to get pregnant or stop and see what happens and come back if something bad happens. It's like, well, that's why 99% of the time it's not a good experience for people. But post birth control syndrome can look like hair loss. It can look like energy, low energy, fatigue, no matter how much sleep you get, inability to handle stress, just feeling, you have really low stress resiliency. And that's one big thing that research shows that birth control negatively impacts our brain in a variety of ways, including decreasing our stress response. So we can't
Mhm.
handle stress as well as someone who wasn't on birth control or wasn't on it for as long of a period of time. It can look like infertility, difficulty conceiving, getting pregnant, missing painful periods, acne, other skin issues. The list goes on and on. But especially if you were put on birth control for a reason other than pregnancy prevention, that symptom will probably come back and it will come back even worse than it did before because it wasn't addressed. And it also, these underlying things that birth control has been doing behind the scene is making it worse.
Okay, so I'm curious, and there might not be research on this, but I want to know your thoughts.
Yeah.
So it's making me think about women who get off birth control cold turkey. They've been on it maybe a really long time, and then they get pregnant fairly. Like I got pregnant pretty shortly after. To be honest, I was kind of surprised. I had a really hard pregnancy physically, but also like mentally and emotionally. And I had really severe postpartum anxiety and rage. And I'm just wondering I'm wondering, would that have looked different if I had never been on birth control? I mean, we won't know for sure, but I'm kind of like making some connections, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. There's a stat and I'm going to try and find it as I talk, but essentially there is actually information about that.
Ooh. Okay.
Women who went back on, so specifically women who went back on birth control postpartum within, I think, 6 months, they did have a higher incidence of postpartum depression.
Mm.
I think it was significant. I mean, I'd have to find the research study, but I looked it up and it was like anywhere from like 30 to 45% higher than someone who didn't go on birth control after. And, you know, there's lots of things that happen during pregnancy and postpartum with your hormones and with your minerals. And one big thing that impacts mental health with birth control that is not being talked about that I learned in my functional training and has just been one of those light bulb moments is copper, because copper is an essential mineral we need,
Mhm.
but copper rises with estrogen. And it also, we need detoxification from our liver to adequately detox copper. And if we have too much copper from, let's say, being on birth control 10 plus years, which is the average, like that's how long I was on it. That's how long minimum majority of my women I'm working with are on it. And they can't detox it appropriately. That excess copper gets stored in their liver and it gets stored in their brain. And that can lead to tons of anxiety, depression, intrusive thoughts, ADHD symptoms, so many things. And copper also rises during pregnancy.
Mm.
So you combine that with I've been on birth control, my copper is probably elevated. I get pregnant, your copper rises naturally, and then you get off and you can't detoxify it. And so there is a clear link in the research with that.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's crazy. That is so crazy. So, gosh, like how do women get access to this information besides coming across random podcasts like mine, like the one that you first came. I mean, this is like a big freaking deal. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like and I'm okay. Like I've made peace. That's why I do this podcast is to educate, but it's like my life could have looked a lot different
Yeah.
if I would have had that information, right? Or
Yeah.
maybe my mom, because it was her, she put me on birth control when I was 14.
Mhm.
So, uh, life could have looked a lot different. And I'm just wondering where this information is besides on podcasts.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's like a couple, besides me, like I said, there's a couple other women out there who are really pioneers in the women's health space. Because what this comes down to also is just our medical system is still based off of primarily men, right? Like women were included in clinical research trials until the 90s. And even
Mhm.
still, a lot of the research is based off of women on birth control because their hormones are flatlined. They're not having those natural ebbs and flows in their hormones like, I mean, essentially like males, right? Like men operate in a 24-hour hormone clock versus ours is 28-ish days, depending on the length of
Mhm.
our cycle until menopause. And so were more complicated to study because of those hormone fluctuations. So there's
Mhm.
just really not a lot of data and education around women's health. And it's still very much, I think it is changing slowly, but it still is very much a like, because of how our medical system is built too, with like a 7 minute quick, you're in and you're out appointment. Doctors unfortunately don't have the education they need, but they don't also have the time to dig deeper into someone's history and to get to the root cause versus they will just take birth control. They think they're doing a good job with that. I don't think anyone goes in the medical field to, harm anyone. And at the same time, it's just a flawed system. That's my whole thing is I just want to bring more awareness to this. So that's why I started my business. I have my own podcast, which you're going to be on here in a few days. And Dr. Jolene Brighton is another person, Alyssa Vitti, Laura Bryden. Those are really great women who are pioneering this space. And you kind of just do have to do digging. And my
Mhm.
biggest piece of advice to women too is if you don't feel like if you feel bad, but you've been your doctor, and your doctor's like, oh, it's all in your head. It's just a part of being a woman. Like that's normal. Like just because it's common doesn't make it normal and you know your body best. And so I think the best thing you can do is just start researching and start advocating because there is information out there, but it's just not mainstream like the conventional stuff when you Google.
Mhm. Absolutely. This is making me think a lot about, um, the progression of my mental health as an adolescent. And, I was put on birth control when I was 14, and then probably I don't know the exact age, and my mom it's kind of a sore topic for my mom, so I can't really ask her a lot of questions about my upbringing. But I think I was put on Paxil like 15 or 16. And now I'm wondering, and I did have a very tumultuous upbringing, but now I'm wondering if some of, my mental health, but also just some of my lack of ability to deal with the stress of my home
Oh,
environment was exacerbated by the birth control.
yeah. Yeah.
And
And sorry, go ahead.
no, I mean, I'm just kind of thinking out loud as we're talking about this. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Well, in one study, I know I shared this with you. I pulled it up because I wanted to make this is one key thing I want women to know when they're listening is there was this large scale study. It's called the Denmark study. And it was 16. It was over 1 million women
Wow.
ages 15 to 34. And over 13 years, they found some really interesting information about birth control and mental health. So, women who were recommended or they were taking the combined oral pill, so like the common birth control pill, were
Mhm.
23% more likely to be prescribed antidepressants compared to non users. And those who were on the progestin only pill had a 34% increased risk, so slightly higher than the combo pill. And teens who were on birth control, so ages 15 to 19, were especially vulnerable. So 80% of them were more likely to be prescribed antidepressants on the combined pill and 120% more likely on the progestin only pill. So they also looked at non oral contraceptives. So, like the PAP and the vaginal ring, and then hormonal IUDs. The
Mhm.
patch, 100% more likely. This is the 15 to 19-year-olds. The
Mhm.
vaginal ring, 60% more likely. And the hormonal IUD, 40% more likely.
So what I'm hearing, my own, conclusion based on what you're saying, if you absolutely need to go on birth control, the IUD is going to be maybe the least risk when it comes to specifically mental health.
Yes, yes. And I would say this is where I'm really loud about advocating for learning other fertility awareness methods. Like, we've
Yes.
also been taught that you have to be on birth control and that you're going to get pregnant all the time, when really there's only a small, portion of the month where you're going to get pregnant. So, yes, if someone really wants that, more safe option, but there's also like this is where I get fired up too because I'm like this is the information we should have been getting in health class of like how
Yeah.
to know when we're ovulating or how to know when we are, when we should have protected sex or not to get or avoid pregnancy versus it being this guessing game and feeling like it all falls on the woman of like, well, you have to be on birth control, you
It
know?
does feel like it all falls on the woman.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I have not shared this publicly, but so I was sexually active when I was 14, and that's essentially I told my mom, and that's essentially like literally within like 5 days, we were at the doctor putting me on birth control because it
Yeah.
was just like there's no way we're having a teen pregnancy. And that
Mhm.
was like the end of it. And you know what I mean? And then I was on birth control until I wasn't, right?
Yeah.
And and I think that it's interesting because, as I'm older now and like have more education, I'm like there's so many ways to monitor and prevent unwanted pregnancies. Obviously, a 14-year-old probably can't handle that. I shouldn't have been being sexually active in the first place. But, as you get older, there's so many things that you can do to monitor that,
Yeah.
right?
And if we teach it younger, I think that's a big thing of like, if we teach it younger, it's not as overwhelming versus I feel like it's more overwhelming when you're older, kind of like learning a new language, honestly. Like when you do it earlier, it's just part of what you do versus now it's like super hard.
And can we talk a little bit about the culture of like it's all on the woman to prevent pregnancy?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Where do you think that comes from? Is it because we're the incubators? Like I'm curious.
Yeah, like, I don't have research on that, but, like, I feel like it could be. I mean, I think it's, like, it's our
Mhm.
body, so it's kind of like, well, if you don't wanna get pregnant, it's harder for us to walk away from that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's more of like and that's where it's like I want women to have the information of like if they don't because that was me. Like, when I sought birth control, I was like, I don't want to get pregnant. Like, I'm not in a space where I want kids. Like, that's not something I want. So I chose the copper IUD because I also the fertility awareness method was so foreign to me. But now I know more about it and more about my body. And it really isn't that complicated. And there are so many people out there that they specialize in fertility awareness method and they specialize in teaching you how to know when to get pregnant, when to not get pregnant with your cycle. So there's support out that's just not as widely recognized. And I think that's hard because it is the woman who has to take that on because it is like she's the one who would have to deal with getting pregnant with her body.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are you seeing with the clients you work with potentially shifting that? Or is that something you're seeing happening or
Yeah.
yeah.
I will say like 75% of the women I work with right now, this ebbs and flows, 75% of the women I work with right now, they want to get off birth control, but it's not to get pregnant. They don't want to get pregnant. It's just more of they want to get off birth control because they're recognizing that it's not actually doing them good and it's not getting to the root of their problem. So most of those women, for example, I have a woman right now who she was put on it for endometriosis and she wants to come off and she actually does want to get pregnant. But then I have other women who they were put on it for acne, painful periods. And they're like, I'm done settling for like a cookie cutter plan. Like I want to get to the root of it. And I know now that it's actually not doing what I thought it was doing and it's doing more harm than good.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it's I didn't have the education before and there was this point where I just was like I don't want to be like I don't think birth control is healthy for me, but I couldn't have told you why I thought that.
Yeah.
It was just this feeling I had.
Hmm.
And when I was up for my IUD, like, renewal or what it is, I just
Yeah.
had taken out and I didn't put it back in. It's interesting because I couldn't have said to you, like, "Here's some stats or facts or whatever to back up how I'm feeling," but, I just had this knowing. And I'm wondering it's really because, like, I'm thinking back to different conversations with different friends and clients and, like, I had this one friend who was, like, struggling with weight loss and some other issues, and she was put on birth control, and I remember thinking, "How is birth control gonna help you with, like, weight loss?" You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And I'm just wondering what the logic is for using birth control as a means to balance hormones or endometriosis or, like, any of these like, what's the actual clinical logic?
So, as someone who, like, that's not my logic, what I can postulate or what I've heard
Oh,
is it it balances your hormones, and I'm doing air quotes if you don't see me. It balances your hormones, but in reality, it doesn't balance your hormones, it shuts them down, which is
yeah.
why so many women still don't feel relief from it, or they might feel it for a period of time, but then it comes back and it gets worse, or when they stop it, yes, it shut down their hormones, but then they come back with a vengeance and the root of the issue wasn't solved. But from my understanding, a lot of doctors recommend it to balance their hormones, but it's actually not balancing it. It's shutting them down. It's flatlining them.
So tell us a little bit more about that. Like, how is it flatlining the
Yeah.
hormone?
So Birth control, the way it works is it's pumping your body full of artificial hormones. So, artificial progesterone, estrogen, which do not work the exact same way as our natural hormones. So, like I said earlier, men have a 24-hour clock. Like their hormones are pretty much flatlined throughout the entire day. Like they don't have very many ebbs and flows, pretty stable. Women, it's a 28-day cycle. When someone's on birth control, because our body isn't making its own hormones, it's being pumped full of those artificial hormones. Our body doesn't make its own. And it is just more of this like, okay, like we're more flatlined throughout the month every single day. So that's why you're also not having, and this was my mind blowing moment, you're not having a real period on birth control, which is something that women are led to believe. It's an artificial, it's a withdrawal bleed. You're shedding your uterine lining, but you're not ovulating. Therefore, that's what prevents you from getting pregnant. But that's like the main event of your menstrual cycle that shows fertility. And that's what a true period is. And a fun fact is that women, when birth control first came out, were so freaked out by not having a period every single month that that's why they created those placebo pills so that women would still have that withdrawal bleed and they thought they were having a period, but it's not actually a true period because they're not ovulating because of those artificial hormones.
Okay, hold on. So, created birth control, there was no week of, like, sugar pills at
hmm
all?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And that's why with the IUD, there's the hormonal IUD, that's a little
Yes.
bit different, but like sometimes you ovulate on that, sometimes you don't. It's that, but that one's like way more like there's not like a week every single month you
Yeah, you don't really
bleed,
have side effects. Trying to think
hmm
back, I think I had like, once it was solid, I think I didn't have a period for, like,
Yep.
a year or 2 or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so, ooh, that brought up something else, but hold on, I'm trying to
I
pace
know.
myself.
It's a lot to unpack.
So when you say you're not ovulating and you think you're having a period, but you're not, can you explain? So, like, if you're not ovulating, like, what happens with the egg? Like, is the egg not?
It's not fertilized because it doesn't have that progesterone. So that's why it's effective at not getting you pregnant.
Mhm.
But, and that's like a big trigger for me when I go, like when you go into your OB or your gynecologist office, like those walls are like paper thin. So like when you're waiting for your person to come in, like I always am sitting there and I'm listening. I can't help but hear next door. And when the nurse goes in and she's like, well, how's your period? Like, how are your symptoms? And the girl's like, whatever, I don't hear. And then the nurse then says, like, well, how's your birth control? I'm like, I just want to rip my hair out because this is propagating this false belief that you're having a period on birth control, but you're not. And I think that's what leads women to think like, oh, it's helping my period because it's not as painful or I'm having a period versus it being missing, but you're
Mhm.
not having a real period. It's masking the deeper issue. It's not solving it.
And doctors think that people are having a period?
Yeah, that's where there's lots of miseducation. Girl, I've been told so many stories, like, I mean, how much time do we have? But
Yeah,
essentially,
well,
I've one of my really good friends struggled with infertility. She's a little bit older than me, and she struggled with infertility, and she's very open about sharing this, and she's, like, very passionate about, like, educating women about this. She was put on birth control to regulate her cycle to help her get pregnant, and it's like, okay, no wonder you struggle like, I mean, there's a lot going on there, but those are the types of things I've heard of that multiple times of women being put on that in their fertility journey to help them get pregnant. But like birth control it's birth control. It prevents you from getting pregnant.
Mhm.
But doctors continue to recommend that.
Okay. So something that just came up for me as I was listening to is I've met a lot of women who are like, "Oh yeah, I got the IUD because I hate having a period, so I just got the IUD." Or I have had girlfriends in the past say, "Oh yeah, I skip that sugar pill week and I go into my next set of pills. I hate having a period." And I want to talk about this bypassing of our design.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up.
It's honestly, it could make me cry. Like, I just feel like we have been taught to betray ourselves
Yeah.
nonstop by so many systems, but right now we're talking about the medical system. It's just like no big deal, and there's no judgment. I mean, there's been things that I've bypassed in my lifetime that I'm looking back and I'm realizing like, wow, you bypassed a process
Mhm.
because of whatever, it was too painful,
Yeah.
this was easier, whatever it was, but it's like we're being taught to betray our own biological design, and it reminds me of even my mom. She was having some issues, and she's an executive at a she a very, successful home builder, and, at one point in her career, she was having, like, these heavy, painful periods, and all this crazy stuff happened, and she was missing work, and eventually her boss was like, "Get it taken care of," and she was a single mom, she was in this high-powered career, like, she was climbing the corporate ladder, and so she had a fucking hysterectomy.
Yeah.
And she still like, I love my mom, she doesn't even know this podcast exists, so it's but she still doesn't see like, she just thinks that that wasn't a big deal, and at one point, she said to me, like, "Have you thought about getting" I don't know, I was having some issues, and she's like, "Have you thought about getting a
Yep.
hysterectomy?" And I'm like,
Um,
"Are you out of your mind? Like, I'm not removing my womb just because I can, like, that's gonna create all sorts of other problems, and that's not the answer to this problem, right?" So, I understand some people it gets to a point where potentially that might be your only option anymore, but like that she didn't explore other options. It was kinda like, "I just gotta figure out what I have to
yeah.
do to be able
She
to
was
get back
desperate.
to work."
Mhm.
And it was like she completely bypassed, like, her design and, like, getting to the root, and it was just and I don't even know if anybody asked any questions, like, what? It was
Yeah.
just like, "Sure, let's take out your organs, no big deal."
Yep. And unfortunately, I hear that from a lot of clients. It's like I was just talking to a client the other day who she's been working with me for a while, and her story was not she didn't start with me on birth control, but she started with me because she did not want to go back on birth control. She had horrible periods where it sounds similar to your mom's story. Like she would pass out, she would throw up, like, and she just would white knuckle it basically 2 weeks because the month or the week before her cycle was horrible too. And it really impacted her life. And the only solution her doctors gave her was like, well, birth control or, hysterectomy. And she was like, I'm in my 20s. I want kids. And she tried birth control, but she was one where it took her mind to a very dark place. She got depressed, very anxious. She had suicidal thoughts. It was not good. And so she was like, this is so frustrating. And so she came to me wanting other options besides, well, your labs are fine. Like just go on birth control or, well, just white knuckle it. So it's very common to be like, well, take this medication to put a band-aid on it, slap a band-aid on it, or take an organ out. And that's not good care.
So, I would just love to hear your thoughts about this, like this idea of women really being taught and pressured to like bypass our design.
Yeah.
And like it just makes me feel really sad. It
Yeah.
makes me really sad about how much we do that and how normalized it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it's one of those things that because it's so common our periods are it's looked at one of these things of like, oh, my period, like "Ugh, my cramps are so bad." It's like one of those things we like connect on as women, and that's not our fault. I think it's important that we connect on it and talk about it. But unfortunately, it's usually when it's really bad and we don't have solutions. It's like
Mhm.
I just talked about this in my podcast. I did an episode of like what's normal for a period and what's not. And
Mhm.
so I dove into this, and I think it's one of the things where it's because so many people struggle with horrible periods or bad period symptoms, we connect on it because it's like almost like when you're bashing like an ex-boyfriend or something. It's just like it's nicer when your friends are chiming in and being like, yeah, we all hated him, versus feeling isolated and just dealing it with yourself. But in reality, your period is your fifth vital sign. So it's
Mm.
just as important as your heart rate, as your blood pressure. It's literally a marker of your health. So when you're bypassing that every single month, you're more disconnected from your body. And two, when you're not having it, right? So like we just said earlier, technically when I was on birth control for 10 years, when you were on it for 10 plus years, we weren't having a period. We weren't able to accurately assess our health. So that's really scary. And it leaves so many women are disconnected already from their body for a variety of reasons. And you're not also seeing like, am I healthy? Like that's a true testament. It's like some people call it your monthly report card of
Mm.
this is a check-in of like, how am I doing? And it's a good chance not to judge, but just to be curious of like, if my menstrual cycle was longer, what was going on? Like, was I more stressed? Was I not, treating my body properly? Was I not sleeping, enough? And when we don't have that, it's sad. And I cringe when people say that. I understand why they say that because a lot of women are suffering with horrible periods. But
Yeah.
that's the problem we should be fixing versus just trying to not have it all.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's there's this narrative that figuring out how to have a healthier period is a lot of work, right? And it's hard. And I mean, it might be work. Like it's really interesting. I interviewed somebody when I first launched this podcast, and something that he shared was a stat around why I think it's like, I might be misquoting the stat just slightly, but only 17% of new strategies and innovative like medical and health strategies actually make it to the medical field. And I thought he was going to say because providers are whatever, like that's a lot of time my perspective. But he said a lot of people also just want a pill. They just want,
Yeah.
and that really got me thinking about our own responsibility, right? It might have started because of the tone was set by the people in power. But now I mean, there's an epidemic of people even on TikTok who are like really proudly repping that they take like anti-anxiety meds and like as if it's like no big deal. Like, yay, had my whatever today.
Yeah.
Like trying to make it trendy to be on medication.
Yeah.
And listen, some people need medication, okay? But it's like there is this cultural, posture around, well, if there's a pill for that, like I can just like it's a
Yeah.
shortcut. And I've shortcutted my way at times too, right? And
Mhm.
because it isn't always 100% easy to figure it out. Like
Yeah.
it's a puzzle and it takes time and patience and things like that. And it's really hard. It's like if you aren't doing that, you are an anomaly or weird, or you know what I mean? There's like so much like normalization of shortcutting
Yeah.
your way to like health results.
Yeah. Yeah, and I talk about that a lot with my clients, like when we're chatting in like a free onboarding call, like before they decide to work with me. I'm like, most of the women, I mean, I'm very grateful. I've really, with my brand and my marketing, I've made it very clear, like this isn't a quick fix. This is the opposite. Like we're doing the down and dirty work. Like we're identifying imbalances that have been there for years. Like this is going to take time because I want to set realistic expectations and be like real, raw, and honest with people. Because, I think it's one of those things if you know going into it versus there is so much of that selling of the quick fix of like, cut this food out and it cleared my acne, or like, take this pill and it helped me not have painful periods or get my period back or whatever. But it's like, that's not also getting to the root cause and it's not designed for your body. We're doing the deeper underlying work of like figuring out through the functional lab testing and uncovering these years of hidden imbalances that birth control created or masked, and getting to that root cause with like nutrition, with lifestyle, with stress support. Those things aren't sexy, right? Like the
Yeah.
labs are sometimes sexy and like supplements and stuff like that. But I really take a holistic approach of like, you need to go into this with proper expectations of like what we're up against. And then when clients see the lab data, that it's usually easier for them to see like, and then we dive into, all of the things that go into that, just like with stress management, like nervous system support. Like that's something I talk a lot about, but that's
Mhm.
sometimes the hardest piece is like when you're go getter type A perfectionist, like speaking for myself, like that was really hard for me and like my health and hormone healing journey. Give me supplements, give me foods, like all that, like cool. But when it was like slow down, don't work on the weekends, like whatever, that was really hard for me.
Yeah, you're like, "What?"
I'm
Yes.
like, that seems counterproductive, but
I feel
yeah,
that deeply. I feel that too.
yeah, totally.
But again, some of that is teaching us to bypass our design
Yeah,
because everybody
totally.
needs rest, but we need even more rest
Yeah.
than our masculine counterparts, right?
And at certain times in our cycle too. Like there are going to be times in your cycle when you need more rest, and that's okay. And I think leaning into that versus expecting yourself to be on 100% all the time.
Yeah. So can I want to talk really quick, and I know you gave like an overview of how birth control can affect our mental health, but thinking about, our actual hormone system of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, can you explain how shutting that system down is like, I think a lot of times we think things are compartmentalized, like, oh, that's just one system, that's fine. But actually, that one system creates a cascade with all the other systems, right? Can
Yeah.
you give us like a little overview of how that hormonal system actually affects everything else?
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll take it a step further. So yeah, like for example, progesterone, it's like a very calming hormone.
Yeah.
And when you are not producing your natural progesterone, it impacts your mental health quite significantly. And like I said, it doesn't function the same way, right? As like the artificial progesterone in birth control or the progesterone only pills. And the other thing too, like besides just the hormones that impact everything, hormones like rule the body, we go deeper than that. And like I said earlier, like the gut health. Gut is so intricately connected with your brain and with your nervous system. And
Mhm.
so if you have dysbiosis or leaky gut, where particles get through the gut lining and into the bloodstream, which can travel to the brain and cause inflammation, those things can impact your mental health.
Mhm.
Nutrient depletion. I always joke too, like minerals are super, super important. Vitamins are super, super important for mental health. So if you have too much copper, right, like that impacts your mental health. Or if you have trouble detoxifying it because of the stress on your liver or your gut, a buildup of estrogen because you can't detoxify that from the estrobolum in your gut, that can cause nervous system dysregulation. So there's so much there, or even those depletion of like zinc and magnesium. Those are calming minerals that birth control impacts. Those things can affect mental health. So yes, the hormones themselves being dysregulated or non-existent, but then also the cascade of the different body systems that birth control affects that also are intricately connected to mental health as well.
Mhm. How okay, so if somebody's trying to figure out, and this might be, you might not be able to answer this, but if somebody's trying to figure out if their birth control is actually affecting their mental health, like is there a way that some things that they can do or things they can clue into to do
Yeah.
that? Right? Maybe they're trying to figure out, do I really want to get off? Like, is this why I'm having so much anxiousness or sleep issues or whatever it is?
Yeah.
Are there some things they can think about or look into first before they get off?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is how long have you been on it? I don't have research to back this up. I've just seen this personally in my experience and professionally because a lot of women I work with are like, I think around like the same age I was. I'm 33 now, but when I was getting off, I was like 27, 28. And that was when I was starting to learn more about this. I was 10 plus years on birth control. So I think that's the age where a lot of women are starting to learn. And it's getting younger too. Like I work with women who are even younger or older and they're learning this information, for the first time. Essentially, think about how long you've been on it because the longer you've been on it, the more this has silently been happening. The more impact it's been having on depleting your minerals, stressing out your gut, possibly causing stuff going on with like copper, your brain, changing your brain, et cetera. And then to, think about when did your anxiety start and is there anything like life related? Like obviously rule out the obvious things of like, are there major life things that impacted this? Is it just life stuff? Because I think that was the hardest thing for me of like, well, I'm like about to turn 30, like I'm, have a big girl job, like I have my own insurance, like I'm really on my own and I moved. And so there are a lot of big things, but it was like a very clear, this is something I can't control. And I was like doing all the things. Like I think that's the next thing I would say is I was, going to therapy. I was on anti-anxiety medication. I was eating healthy. I was like doing all the right things, but it wasn't touching things. And so that's where I finally was like, I think this is a deeper thing. And to your point too earlier of just listening to your intuition, I think that would be
Yeah.
my first tip because I have so many women who they come to me and they're like, I can't tell you what's wrong. I just know something's wrong, but
What's
no one can help me. I think it's my birth control. I think that's a piece of the puzzle. And
Yeah.
they just have this deeper intuition. So I think listen to that too.
Yeah, it's really interesting because as you were speaking, I was thinking back to my own history with my mental health. And, I became very anxious about a year or 2 after, I was put on birth control.
Mhm.
And not to say I didn't have any anxiousness or whatever. Like I said, I had a tumultuous upbringing, but I became like obsessively anxious, right?
Yeah.
Like just racing thoughts, perseveration. And that was going on for the majority of my, from adolescence into my young adult life. Got off the birth control, obviously had the pregnancy and then, had the postpartum anxiety and rage. But I noticed that my mental health improved about 18 months after I had my daughter. And I was on the IUD for a couple years after, but then, like, my mental health significantly improved. It wasn't, like, racing thoughts, like, I was still a little bit anxious, but it was, like, more of, like, I was activated versus
Constant.
this, like well, more of this, like, cognitive
Okay.
turmoil, the racing thoughts that like, that was gone, and then after I got off birth control, like, that's not really been a thing in my life, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's been touch and go of that, like, during times of really intense, tumultuous situations in my life, but that's not, like, that hasn't been my baseline for like, 10 plus years,
Mhm.
right? And I just thought, like, I'm growing, evolving, maturing, but I'm actually thinking that some of it had to do with what was happening kind of chemically or biochemistry wise with the things that I was on and then got off and all of that. You know what I mean?
Yep, totally. I think that's a perfect example of like there probably was a pretty clear connection, but just like back then you didn't know or this was not talked about. Like it's still not talked about enough, but even though there's tons of research on it, and that's why we want to get this information out there, you know?
Yeah, and that doesn't even cover because I've just recently learned about I have all sorts of methylation issues.
Yep.
And
That
so
yeah, that
that
doesn't even cover that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like it's interesting because I was talking to one of my dear friends and she's a retired registered nurse and I was like all pissed off, and she's like, "Andrea, you have to remember that some of this stuff didn't exist. Like this
Yeah.
information didn't exist or it wasn't accessible or whatever." And sometimes I forget that, right? That there's so much more information and so many amazing resources and new technology for different types of tests that people can get access to understand their own body, without a doctor in a lot of ways or with like a concierge type service that they pay for or type of thing. And so all these different things are definitely bringing new levels of awareness,
Mhm.
right, to the surface, and
Yeah.
it's becoming more accessible to more people as well,
Yeah,
right?
and that's why it's really important to yes, advocate for yourself in your doctor's office, but also find someone who listens to you and
Yeah,
runs the right tests, treats you as a whole body approach, not just like a 7-minute quick in and out visit that's covered by insurance and takes, that information and creates a customized plan to your body.
yeah,
You might need to find a new provider. You might need to seek out someone who specializes it, whether it's myself or someone else who really understands women's health because it is a specialty. It doesn't seem like it should be, but it is a specialty. And especially when it comes to birth control, like even from a business standpoint, I was like nervous to niche down this specifically when I was starting my business, but I was like, this is like such a need. I know it's going to be harder to get my, eyes on my business and reach as many people at first. But then once I do, I know so many women are struggling with this because exactly what we've talked about, like normalized because it's common, but just common doesn't make it normal.
yeah, absolutely, and I think there are lots of women who actually do wanna get off their birth control, but
They're
they don't
scared.
they don't think that there's any other option
Yeah.
but to stay on it.
Yeah. They've heard the horror stories. Maybe they've experienced it themselves. They're scared of, and I've heard really sad stories from clients of like they were kind of felt forced to stay on it by their doctor of like, oh, well, if you stop, you're gonna. I had one woman who literally said her doctor told her like she would go crazy if she stopped birth control because she was in her 50s. She was probably perimenopause, menopause for sure. And she was like, I want to come off because I like don't need it. And I know it's not helping me. She had tons of symptoms. She'd been on it for 30 plus years. And her doctor was like, well, if you go off now, you'll feel crazy. And I'm like, that is not how we should be spoken to. And that is like leaving women stuck between a rock and a hard spot of like, okay, well, I have nothing else to do. And that's where I really want to fill that gap of like, no, it doesn't have to be like that. You are proactive about it. And if you have the right plan.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we still very much live in a time where unfortunately we see physicians as the only authority or like a major authority and it can feel and I say this on the podcast all the time with many different guests like it can feel very intimidating to try to advocate for yourself or ask for something I mean, it just happened to me recently where I've been having some stomach issues and I bit the bullet and I went to a gastroenterologist, which I don't know why I even bothered, but anyway, and I said no to a medication right away. I'm like, "I'd like to
Mhm.
explore my stomach first, like, before," and it was, "What, why?" Like, as if I was some weirdo for not just saying, "Sure, I'll take that medication."
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
And they weren't, like, super intimidating, but it was just like, "Well, why?" I'm just trying to understand, like, why wouldn't you? I remember my daughter's pediatrician at one point was, like, kind of drilling me about why I didn't wanna get her the flu shot. And it's just like, so it's it can be and I can
yeah,
hold my own ground whether I have the evidence or not. I'm just like, "Because," right? Like, and I kinda shut it down, but most people don't feel
yeah,
they can do that. It's very intimidating. I've
yeah,
left doctor's offices when I was younger crying because I felt so, like, made to feel so small, or I'm weird, or I don't know my own body, or I might know my body, but it's not medical knowledge, so I'm invalid, and I'm a white woman with a lot of privilege, right? That doesn't even touch, like, what other groups
yeah,
experience and how they're treated, and I think I just bring this up again in another episode because as people are listening, I want you to hear me, like, you can advocate. It might be uncomfortable and you might leave feeling not great, but you'll know that you advocated and you don't need to have all the answers. You can just say that it doesn't feel right. You don't
yeah,
need to prove why it doesn't feel right to anybody. You know what I mean?
yep, yeah,
And I think that that's so important that people are just can hear that as many times as possible so that at some point they feel confident enough to take that risk and just say, "No, I don't wanna go on the birth control," or "I don't wanna do this," or "I don't wanna do that. It doesn't feel right for me," or whatever.
yeah, and finding someone who will give you other alternatives, and so my big
Yes.
thing is, like, figuring out what are the deeper imbalances that are leading to XYZ symptom, so that way you don't feel like you have to either white knuckle it or just deal with it, or
Yeah.
just stay on birth control for your entire life.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's talk about some of the like resources that you have for ladies maybe not quite ready to bite the bullet, but they want to start educating themselves, they want to explore. Obviously, there's your Instagram
Mhm.
page. I think I saw that you have a course.
Yes. Yes. I have a free masterclass. So it's called the Breakup with Birth Control Masterclass. So it's really great for the woman who is ready and wants to learn more about my approach, the functional labs I mentioned. I share real life case studies in there of women who have successfully used my signature framework to transition off birth control. But it's also great just to understand like a deeper dive into we just scratched the surface today of like how birth control works, how it impacts your body,
Mhm.
letting you kind of connect the dots too of like, is this a piece of your story or not? Just so you can become educated, right? Because whether you decide to stay on it or not, I just want you to know that there are natural ways to heal your hormones that don't involve having to just suppress them with birth control. So I have that masterclass. And yeah, Instagram is where I'm most active. You can feel free to DM me, have a conversation if anyone is interested in kind of chatting more. But I would say those are probably the best two, along with my podcast, which I almost forgot to mention. I have a podcast called She's in Sync, where I dive into any and all things hormones, birth control, all those things.
Okay, amazing. We'll link all of that below in the show notes.
Perfect.
I love it. Okay, so I could talk to you forever about this, but I feel like this is a really good point for us to pause. And I am just so excited. I can't wait for people to find you and learn from you. And the work that you're doing is so important. And I'm really glad that this is like the mission that you're on because we
Yeah.
really need it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for letting me be on the podcast and get this information out there, like you said, because I know so many women need it.
Absolutely. All right, guys, we'll see you in the next episode.